My father's relationship with the Lincoln Heights Homeowners Association began as a simple, unremarkable formality. Just the usual monthly dues, mild community events, and the occasional barbecue. We never imagined that an HOA that seemed as harmless as a picket fence neighborhood cookout would one day ignite a war that threatened our family's most treasured property and reveal an unexpected power dynamic. But that's exactly what happened when the HOA decided to expand the neighborhood's communal gym, illegally, and in the process, tore through my father's back fence as if it were made of paper. The story really begins with my dad's complicated position in town. He was a banker, a regional director for a reputable financial institution that funded many local municipal projects, including some of Lincoln Heights' beautification initiatives. He was never one to flaunt his influence. Quiet and polite, my father believed in using his role for good, offering low-interest loans for new businesses and ensuring stable mortgages for families. Rarely did he mention that the HOA, with its shining new tennis courts and clubhouse renovations, often relied on loans from his bank. Dad didn't advertise that fact. He was too humble for such bragging. So while the rest of the neighborhood saw him as just another homeowner, perpetually tinkering in his backyard workshop, the HOA board and its president, Geraldine Jacobs, had no idea Dad's bank was the very one underwriting some of their expansions. They merely saw him as Mr. Patterson, the quiet man who paid his dues on time and politely waved at the board members when they patrolled the streets in their golf carts. Certainly, none of them would have predicted the storm that would unfold once they decided to cut corners on the gym expansion. I first noticed something amiss on a drizzly morning when I visited my parents for coffee. As I parked out front, the ruckus of construction equipment drowned out the usual chirping birds. Tucked behind the HOA clubhouse, I glimpsed heavy machinery, bulldozers, excavators, and a flurry of workers in neon vests. Strange, I thought. The last official mention from the HOA was a minor remodel for the small fitness room. Now it looked like they were doubling or tripling the building's footprint. Inside, I found Dad hunched over the kitchen table with building permits and aerial photos spread in front of him. His brow furrowed. He tapped a red marker on a particular line in the paperwork. "Look," he said, voice low with frustration. "They're planning to push this new gym all the way to the property boundary. And see here." He traced a line along the map. "This layout indicates they'll dig right up against our backyard fence. There's no real buffer zone." I peered over his shoulder. "That can't be allowed," I said. "The setback regulations alone should keep them a decent distance away." "Did you talk to them?" He nodded. "I tried. I even went to Geraldine's office hours last week. Asked politely about the expansion. She gave me a vague answer about progress for the community, and it's all approved. But the permit she handed me doesn't match this construction spree. It's not just a remodel. They're building an entire 2-story facility with a steam room, a lounge area. None of that is in the official permit we got in the mail." My mother, washing dishes, interjected softly. "Your father thinks they're ignoring certain codes. Or maybe they bribed someone to get hush-hush approval." Dad grimaced. "I don't want to assume corruption right away, but it's suspicious." Over the next few days, the construction noise ramped up. Trucks rattled the streets from dawn until well past dinner time. Workers hammered steel beams into place, raising a hulking structure that cast a long shadow over our yard. My father's frustration grew with each sunrise. He politely emailed the HOA board, then called them, requesting a formal explanation. The board responded with cryptic, dismissive reassurances. "Don't worry, Mr. Patterson, everything is code compliant. Or we have permission from the county. Relax." But we realized the real trouble one evening when I came home from work to find my father pacing in the backyard. A large swath of our fence was gone, knocked flat to the ground. Beyond the splintered wood, I could see a battered trench that extended from the construction site into our property line, carving away a chunk of our rose bushes and old sycamore tree roots. Ruts from heavy machinery dug deep into the soil. The careful landscaping Dad had nurtured for over a decade lay in ruins. My father clenched his fists, voice shaking. He inhaled sharply. "They ripped right through. Didn't knock, didn't ask. They must have realized the fence stood in the way of their planned foundation. so they bulldozed it. I felt my own anger rising. We have to talk to Geraldine. Immediately. She can't just destroy our property. That's got to be illegal. Dad's face hardened. Oh, it's illegal, all right. We marched to the HOA office that evening, only to find it closed. The next morning, Dad confronted Geraldine in the parking lot as she arrived for work. She wore her usual smug expression, sporting a crisp pastel pantsuit, hair coiffed in an immaculate bob. Leaning on her SUV, she blinked with exaggerated innocence. "You must be mistaken," Geraldine told him with a patently insincere smile. "We're building strictly on HOA land, which is community property. If your fence was encroaching on that boundary, well, that's not our problem. Our surveyors said we had the right to remove it." My father's jaw tightened. "Encroachment? That fence has been in place for 15 years, well within our line. I have my own survey from when we bought the house. You had no right to demolish it." Geraldine shrugged, turning to rummage in her purse. "Talk to the board if you want a hearing. We have a busy expansion schedule. That gym is going to be a selling point for new residents. Great for property values." She waved, dismissive. "Must dash." Dad stood there, stunned. The arrogance was staggering. The weeks that followed turned into a nightmare. The construction crew tore deeper into our yard, apparently unconcerned about property lines. The once green lawn near the fence became a dirt pit. My father kept a log of every new incursion, every violation of local building codes he could identify. Ignoring required setbacks, building beyond the approved blueprint, possibly using substandard materials. He tried filing complaints with the county inspector, but the inspector's visits were sporadic. Meanwhile, the HOA kept forging ahead at a breakneck pace. The house's foundation started to shift near the southwestern corner. Hairline cracks in our basement walls suggested the excavation next door was disturbing the soil. My father's heartbreak was palpable. He'd built this home from scratch, poured years of care into each beam, each row of flowers. Now it was threatened by an expansion that served no one but the HOA board's vanity. In the middle of this chaos, an uncomfortable thought dawned on me. The HOA was partially funded by Dad's bank. They had secured lines of credit for various community improvements, like repaving roads and installing better streetlights. There was no reason, in principle, that they couldn't have applied for the gym expansion loan from the same institution. But Dad never recalled signing off on something so grand, which meant they might have found a backdoor method. Or even worse, they had a loan from another branch or a partner institution, but were out of compliance, risking default or penalties. "Dad," I asked one afternoon, "have you checked the bank records to see if they requested a new line of credit for this project?" He paused, eyes narrowing. "Not specifically, but it's worth investigating. They might have done it under some generic facility improvement name. If they're building illegally, we can hold them accountable. Possibly freeze the funds." Plan took shape. My father decided to quietly investigate how the HOA financed this expansion. We suspected that if they'd lied about property boundaries, they might also have lied to the bank. With Dad's position as a regional director, he had access to loan applications filed by local HOAs, city councils, and community organizations. If the HOA's project was misrepresented in those documents, it could trigger serious legal ramifications. Maybe it'd force them to stop the construction before more damage was done. That weekend, as bulldozers roared behind our battered yard, I found my father in his study, poring over digital files. He'd requested them from the bank's underwriters. Staring at his screen, he said, "They submitted an application 6 months ago for clubhouse renovations and minor expansions. Very generic. Approved for $500,000. But what they're building is far beyond that scope. They must have hidden the real specs from the bank." I felt hope stir in my chest. "So they're in breach of contract?" He scrolled further. "Likely. They promised minimal structural changes, no mention of encroaching on private property. If we show the bank they're misusing the funds, the loan might be revoked." A fierce light of determination lit in Dad's eyes. "They destroyed our fence, tore up my yard, and threatened the stability of our home. They think they're unstoppable. They have no idea that the person they're defying is the same man behind their financial lifeline. Outside, the gears of construction ground on, steel beams rising ominously over our backyard. But for the first time in weeks, Dad's shoulders lifted. He had a powerful card to play. The HOA might have soared too close to the sun, and they were about to learn exactly who held the financial reins. Little did they know that the quiet man they dismissed so casually was preparing to pull the rug out from under them, and it would be swift, final, and entirely legal. On a hazy Monday morning, my father straightened his tie, grabbed a slim folder of incriminating documents, and headed to the bank's corporate offices downtown. I trailed behind him, heart hammering. We had everything. Photos of our ruined fence, building plans that contradicted the HOA's official statements, and copies of the loan application. Evidence that the HOA had drastically exceeded the scope of what they'd promised the bank. In a polished conference room overlooking the cityscape, Dad met with the bank's senior loan committee. Composed of seasoned executives used to dealing with large municipal projects, they listened intently as Dad laid out how the Lincoln Heights HOA had apparently misrepresented their gym expansion. He showed them side-by-side comparisons. The submitted documents listed a small expansion of around 2,000 square feet, while the real construction was well over 5,000, creeping onto private property. The committee's eyebrows rose with each new piece of evidence. "Mr. Patterson?" asked one member, adjusting her reading glasses. "Are you suggesting we freeze or call in the loan? That's a drastic measure. Typically, we'd send an inspector or request clarifications." Dad nodded solemnly. "I'm recommending we place an immediate hold. They've destroyed private property, defied local building codes, and jeopardized the loan's legitimacy. This is a high-risk situation. If it continues, the bank could be liable for funding an illegal project." Another committee member, a gentleman in a tailored navy suit, tapped his pen on the table. "We should at least open a formal investigation. If they're in breach, the contract terms allow us to demand repayment or halt further funds." Dad slid over a final photograph of our backyard in disarray. "I think once you see the violation for yourselves, you'll realize how serious this is. The neighbors could sue not just the HOA, but also the bank for enabling it. If the board can't demonstrate full compliance, we must act." The committee exchanged glances. Dad's calm, authoritative tone, and the personal evidence of wrongdoing left them little doubt. By the meeting's end, they voted unanimously to issue a notification of noncompliance to the Lincoln Heights HOA, halting any disbursement of the remaining loan amount. If the HOA failed to rectify the illegal encroachments and provide updated, accurate building permits, they'd lose their funding entirely. That afternoon, a formal letter from the bank arrived at the HOA's office. We didn't have to guess the fallout. By early evening, Geraldine stormed down our street, her pastel suit a blur as she banged on our door. Mom opened it with polite caution, and Dad stepped forward. Geraldine's face was flushed with fury. "Mr. Patterson, how dare you sabotage us? You can't just freeze our loan." My father stood taller than usual, arms folded. "I'm not the one who built outside the permitted area, bulldozed a fence, and lied about the project scope. That's on you." She waved the letter in the air, the official bank seal glinting under the porch light. "You reported us to your own bank? You have no right. This is a personal vendetta. Do you realize how many people rely on this gym expansion?" Dad kept his voice steady. "I have every right to protect my property and ensure the bank doesn't finance illegal construction. You attacked first, Geraldine, by destroying part of our yard." Geraldine sputtered, searching for a retort, but all she managed was, "We'll fix the fence. We'll put it back. But you can't just ruin the entire project." My father shook his head. "You and the board need to comply with actual building regulations, show accurate permits, and pay for the damages. Only then might the loan be reinstated. Until that happens, the bank has pulled your funding." She pressed her lips into a thin line, eyes darting as if weighing her next move. Finally, she snapped, "We'll see about that," before marching away, heels clacking with anger. The next couple of days were a whirlwind. Construction at the site screeched to a halt as the builder realized the promised finances were in limbo. Workers packed up tools, perplexed about their pay. Meanwhile, the HOA board flailed. They scrambled to gather updated permits, tried to bribe the local inspector for a quick fix, and even convened an emergency homeowners meeting where Geraldine ranted about Mr. Patterson's betrayal. At that meeting, Dad and I showed up uninvited. Tension thickened the air. Some neighbors, unaware of the fiasco's details, shot us accusing looks. Geraldine had apparently spun a story that Dad was against community improvements. But once we displayed the photographs of the fence torn down, cracks forming in our basement, and the inflated building plans, the mood shifted. Whispers of discontent rippled through the crowd. One by one, residents began questioning the board's actions. "This blueprint doesn't match the one we voted on," said Ms. Rubin, a longtime resident. "We only approved a minor expansion, not some fancy multi-story gym." Others chimed in about the noise, the property lines, how the HOA fees had skyrocketed to fund mystery additions. The board members squirmed, while Geraldine tried to hush them, insisting everything was above board. But Dad calmly explained that the bank discovered multiple discrepancies. Without legitimate permits, the loan was revoked, meaning their grand project was effectively doomed. By the meeting's end, a large faction of residents demanded an immediate revote. They insisted on halting all construction until a new, transparent plan could be put forward, one that respected property boundaries and local laws. Geraldine, cornered by the anger of her neighbors, tried to salvage her authority, but her voice was drowned out by calls for her resignation. In the weeks that followed, the fallout grew. The local building inspector, no longer able to turn a blind eye, issued a stop-work order. Fines were levied for code violations. The partially erected steel frame of the new gym loomed like an unfinished skeleton behind the existing clubhouse, a stark reminder of the board's hubris. Meanwhile, the old, modest fitness room sat as it was, with no funds to expand legally. Geraldine stepped down as HOA president under mounting pressure. A new interim board took over, made up of more level-headed residents who wanted to rectify the damage. They contacted Dad with apologies, promising to rebuild our fence properly and restore our landscaping. They also asked for his help in navigating the bank's protocols to possibly reapply for a smaller, law-abiding loan. At first, Dad was reluctant. He didn't relish bailing out the same HOA that caused so much grief. But after seeing neighbors who genuinely wanted a functional, properly permitted improvement, he agreed to advise the new board. Under his guidance, they drew up fresh plans that stayed within the property lines, added soundproofing for the equipment noise, and kept the expansion to a more reasonable size. They also pledged to reimburse us for the fence and the repairs to our property. Only after all these conditions were met did the bank consider their revised application. The day a construction crew arrived to repair our fence felt surreal. I watched from the porch as they put in sturdy new posts exactly where the original boundary lay. My father stood by, arms folded, ensuring everything was up to code this time. Slowly, a sense of justice settled over our household. In the end, the ordeal had a ripple effect in Lincoln Heights. Residents realized how easily an unchecked HOA board could overreach. Many demanded more transparency in how dues were spent and refused to accept vague beautification projects without solid evidence of compliance. Our story became a cautionary tale. When you disregard property lines and legal requirements, the blowback can be immense, especially if you unknowingly pick a fight with the very individual who holds your purse strings. As for Dad, he never bragged about shutting down the illegal expansion. Whenever neighbors asked about the fiasco, he'd shrug and say, "I just did what needed to be done to protect our property and protect the bank from a bad deal." But around the dinner table, we couldn't help smiling at the irony. The HOA, so confident in their plan, had no clue they'd bulldozed the fence of the man who literally financed their projects. Their arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that one quiet homeowner could wield that much influence. Today, a modest but well-designed gym stands behind the clubhouse, complete with a correct permit and a respectful distance from our yard. It's smaller than originally envisioned, but it's safe, legal, and nobody's fence was destroyed to build it. Our father's yard has returned to its former peaceful state, lush and well-tended, with a brand-new fence even sturdier than before. Occasionally, Dad glances toward the gym's roofline peeking above the shrubs, and a wry smile crosses his face. He never set out to be a local folk hero or an HOA vigilante. All he wanted was to enjoy his property in peace and ensure the bank he worked for wasn't funding wrongdoing. In the end, justice prevailed. The overreaching HOA had learned a vital lesson. Never underestimate the quiet banker next door, especially if his property stands in the path of your bulldozer. For if you do, you might just find your funding and your ambitions coming to a swift and humbling halt.